Hello and welcome to Retro Breeze. After what seems like an eternity of peril and suffering, I'm here to show you how to sort of play Laserdisc arcade games on the Miyoo Mini using the Daphne emulator. Laserdisc, or LD Arcade, dates back to the very early 1980s, and the Daphne emulator is named after a character from one of the flagship games, Dragon's Lair. These games are often bizarre but also totally wonderful, with their beautiful FMV animations and unique storytelling. There's this awesome driving game where you avenge your wife through pure road rage, a game based on Lupin III, and of course the aforementioned Dragon's Lair. These games were very much quarter vacuuming arcade cabinets, so expect punishing and often straight up unfair difficulty. Alright, there is a caveat to this video, and a reason why I'm not referring to it as a guide or tutorial. Daphne games are incredibly fiddly, and it can often come down to the very specific ROM you find, whether it is going to work or not. In addition, there are several games that, despite my best efforts, I was not able to find a working version. This may come down to the controls, the ROM itself, or some other reason. It is what it is, and unfortunately I've spent a huge amount of time on this topic over the last week or two, trying to make it more palatable with little avail. In all transparency, I almost did not make this video because the final results are just so sketchy and unreliable and so difficult to set up, but I decided to put it out there anyway. Please take this video for what it is, an exploration of the very general setup and file structure needed to run a handful of Daphne games, and not really a full tutorial or guide. All that said, I have created a repository on GitLab which will take care of some of the heavy lifting for you. It contains a set of folders and files that you need for the games, box art, and a fully configured Miyoo game list, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So, in essence, this video will help you to understand the file structure you need to make the games that work, and to get you going with some of the most popular games. You'll also learn a little about how Daphne works and what a frame file is. If you happen to find a way to make any of this work better, or to make more games work, or literally anything like that at all, please let us know in the comments or open an issue on the GitLab project and share that information with the community. I'm sure that everybody would appreciate it. First, let's install the Daphne system on the Miyoo Mini's Onion OS. Go to Apps, then the Onion installer, then go over to the Experimental tab and find Daphne. Activate it with A, then press Start to go back to the menu. Daphne won't appear in your usual console list. It's an experimental emulator on the Mini, so we'll need to enable Expert View to see it. Go into Apps, then find the entry that says Clean View Enabled. Press A and your Mini will soft reboot. Now, when you go back to the main menu, a new section named Expert will appear with Daphne inside. Note that if you ever want to disable the Expert View, you want to go into the Apps menu and find Expert View Enabled and choose that instead. Now it's time for the movies. The games. As I mentioned before, it is super confusing to find working ROMs for Daphne, and to set them up. First, you need to understand the structure of a Laserdisc ROM, and I'm going to be using Dragon's Lair as an example. Inside the Daphne folder on the SD card, there are a handful of folders: frame file, pics, RAM, ROMs, and sound. Let's start with the frame file folder. Inside the folder, I have another folder called lair.daphne, and a text file, lair.txt. The lair.txt is a frame file, and it has 2 or more lines depending on the game. The first line is a file path that points to the location of the game's video, audio, and other required files. The second line defines video files to load at specific points of playback. Actually, a Daphne game is essentially a movie. It's a video file, and the emulator will skip around to different points in the video to simulate gameplay. Now, I'm not exactly sure how these frame files are supposed to work, and I haven't really needed to mess with them directly. Just make sure that the first line points to the location of your video and audio files. In this case, it's the lair.daphne folder inside the frame file folder. You can put this anywhere you want, but I've just configured these files to be inside the frame file folder just to keep things clean. Inside the lair.daphne folder, we'll find the video, audio, and any other files the game needs to run. Now let's back out and go into the ROMs folder. Here is lair.zip, which is the ROM file that we'll use for launching the game. So Dragon's Lair is a very simple example, but it can get very complex. For example, other games might need caches, RAM files, or even more video files. Dragon's Lair 2, for example, uses hundreds of video and audio files and a frame file with hundreds of lines. Anyway, all of this information is pretty pointless if you can't sort through games, which is where things quickly get really annoying, as I mentioned before. ROMs that work on PC might not work on the Mini or some other device. Many files and folders are needed for every Daphne game. Various video and audio qualities are available out there. For example, you might even find 1080p upscaled versions of these games, or the original lower resolutions. And I've not yet found a single set of ROMs that works perfectly on the Mini. Still, I'm going to tread the line here, and I'm going to tell you to look for a collection named Laserdisc Games, Daphne and MAME on an Internet Archive website. This archive contains the highest number of games that I have found to work, and it is what my GitLab project is based on. The rest of this video assumes that you have that archive, so go ahead and acquire it before continuing. Extract the Laserdisc archive, then open the Daphne emulator plus American Laser Games folder. Extract the inner zip file, and open the resulting folder and the next one too. Now open your Miyoo Mini SD card, go into ROMs, and then the Daphne folder. We need to copy the following folders from the downloaded archive into the Minis folder: Framefile, Pics, RAM, ROMs, and Sound. Go back to the top Laserdisc Games folder and open the roms.zip file. Copy all of the inner .zip files onto your SD card into the ROMs, Daphne, ROMs folder. These are the files we'll select to launch your games, but we're not quite ready for that yet. Back in the Laserdisc Games folder, there is a zip file for each of the games. Inside each of these zips is a .daphne folder. We want to extract all of these folders into the Framefile folder on our SD card. The last thing we need to do is configure the frame files to point to the .daphne folders. But rather than having you do that yourself, we can use my archive instead. There's a link in the description box below to the GitLab page. Click the download button, then zip. Extract the file and open the folder inside. Then copy the rapp and roms folder onto the root of your SD card and overwrite any files and folders when prompted. And that about does it for the setup. The folders that you copied contain configured frame files pointing to those .daphne folders, as well as a Miyoo game list and box art to make the game list look very nice on the Mini. Reinsert your SD card into the Mini, then refresh your ROMs, go into the expert section and open Daphne. And here's all your games with the box art looking very lovely. Something like Space Ace or Dragon's Lair should boot right up and work just fine. Or it might just crash one or more times, or it might just not work at all. It really is super buggy. Once in-game, you'll usually use the select button to add coins and start to begin. Some of the games can take a very long time to boot up, and you might see them crash often. Road Blaster is a great example. When it works, it's absolutely great and the gameplay works just fine, but it often takes a couple of tries to launch, and even then crashes sometimes during gameplay too. As for compatibility, there is a table on my GitLab project with my observations, complete with MD5 hashes of each ROM archive I've tried, which are the ones in the Laserdisc archive. Essentially, 7 of the games work fairly well out of the 17 in the archive. And there are some games like Dragon's Lair 2, Cliffhanger, and Mach 3, which launch just fine but don't respond to any controls at all. I have looked for hours to try and find a fix to this input problem, and on the Miyoo Mini I have not been able to find a solution. On the PC, these games work just fine, so I know the games themselves are fine. If anybody can figure out how to make the controls work in these games, please share that information with the community. Anyway, there's so much configuration and so many different sets available, but it is entirely possible that you might be able to find your own ROMs that work better than the ones that I've tried. Remember to set up your frame file to point to the game files and add it to the Miyoo game list. If you're able to make any additional games work, please share it with the community. Alright, that's about it for this video. It has taken a really long time, and to be honest the results are not really what I had hoped. Still, I hope you enjoy the games that do work, like Dragon's Lair is just so much fun. It's a timeless classic, despite the difficulty. And I hope that you're able to share your findings with the community too. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, a comment, and of course subscribe to my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. This is Shem from RetroBreeze, and I will see you again with a new tutorial very soon.